Well, thank you for reaching out, man. I'm looking forward to getting into Perfect Strangers. I appreciate it.
Thanks for having me on.
Yeah. So talk to me a little bit about this release. It looks like it came out just about a week ago.
Exactly.
Give me an idea of how it feels.
It feels great. How the music feels, or how it feels to be releasing music.
I think both. I mean, it's kind of a visceral and a real thing at the same time.
Yeah. Well, releasing it has been really lovely because it's the first time I've tried to do something totally independently, and it's just going really well, like much better than I expected, which is lovely. So that feels really nice. Like not having, I've worked with PR companies and labels who have all been fantastic, but it's quite nice that there's no one in between. It's just me and whoever's buying it, or you, or whoever it is. And it's really nice having that direct communication. It just feels very like, kind of reminds me of the I think the reason why a lot of people do music, which is like connection ultimately. And then the feeling of the music, that's an interesting one. I definitely had a feeling in mind quite a lot when I was writing the tunes and kind of preparing and rehearsing with the guys, which was I wanted it to feel like very I guess like comforting, but still interesting and stimulating and challenging, like in the way that I think a lot of amazing old jazz recordings do. I was just listening to that Coltrane and Ellington album a couple of days ago, the one where Coltrane plays In a Sentimental Mood. And I was just like, yeah, man, it's like it's so vibey. Like I don't actually know who's on drums. I need to look it up, maybe you know, but whoever's on drums on that album, they're like really going for it, even on In a Sentimental Mood. But the whole thing still just feels so like you're just being hugged, even though there's this, like vibey dynamic stuff going on. And I think that that's something that jazz can do that maybe not a lot of other genres can do, although maybe some like African guitar stuff can kind of, for me, have that similar feeling of like you're being stimulated and kind of challenged and pushed along, but you're also just being like hugged.
I totally get it.
So I was definitely trying to create that vibe a lot with these recordings. Like we did record it to tape, not necessarily because I wanted to do the full like retro fetishization thing, but I think just because, again, like a lot of these recordings that I love, for better or for worse, they have that sound, which is a sound, whether or not you think it's the best sound or not. I mean, sorry, by the sound I mean the analog tape sound. And so I think, again, in my head, that's just part of what makes up that feeling I was describing. So I was kind of like, well, I guess we better do it like that then.
So let me ask you this: what are you ultimately hoping the listener gets from this album? What's your hope?
Enjoyment. Sounds so silly, doesn't it? But
no,
I really just want people to enjoy it and just enjoy listening. I mean, I think because obviously I'm a musician, as you are as well, right?
I'm enough to be dangerous, but I'm more of an admirer.
Okay, but you played drums
a little bit, very scant. Yes.
Okay. But I guess as doing what you do, you probably hear a lot of music generally, partly because you just have to listen to stuff because people are sending you stuff and whatever. And even me playing in different projects, working on music, hearing stuff, having to learn stuff, I still notice when I hear something where I'm kind of like, oh, I actually just want to stop what I'm doing and just listen to this. And it does still happen for me, even though it's, rarer than it was when I was a teenager. But I guess that makes sense because I've just heard so much more music now. But I suppose really that's, even though it sounds a bit simplistic, I just wanted to make something that people would really want to listen to, that they would hear it and they'd just kind of be like, oh yeah, what's going on here? Like, just going to stop chopping my vegetables for a moment or whatever. But that also they can leave on while they're chopping the vegetables.
So you mentioned that this is the first time that you broke off and done and led this project. What have you been used to before? What's kind of been your role lately?
My role has been working on projects usually with like a kind of small independent label involved. So I did 2 albums with a kind of large ensemble like spiritual jazz thing called Teotima, which was, it wasn't a big band. Like it didn't have as, it had almost as many musicians as a big band, but rather than it all being the full saxes and trumpets and trombones and stuff, we had some strings, we had like extra percussion, um, and we did two albums with like a kind of independent label here called First Word. And I produced an album for this amazing Congolese singer called Juanita Euka, who lives here in London as well. And that was also with a kind of independent label, Strut, who actually, they release a lot of the Idris Akamor and the Pyramids stuff. Strut do, but they're based here. So yeah, I've done a lot of kind of arranging and producing and sorting out arrangements and kind of playing the guitar parts in like kind of world music and jazz related genres, like those projects. But I haven't done like a, here's me playing guitar, small format quartet
Yeah.
solos, my own tunes thing. It's funny in a way to me, even though those things are obviously quite different, like Congolese singer-songwriter, spiritual jazz with strings, sax and guitar jazz quartet. To me, that none of them are that different, because when I'm writing, I'm usually thinking the same thing.
Yeah.
I've just got a slightly different set of instruments to play with or whatever. But I think it ends up sounding quite different to the listener. But often I'm not trying that hard to do different things. I'm just kind of trying to write tunes that I like and then play them as well as I can.
Yeah. Yeah. I totally get it. So
Yeah.
talk to me a little bit about your beginnings. Where were you born and raised? How did music and more specifically jazz become your destiny?
I'm from here. I'm from London. My mum's Spanish, but she was here. My parents were here when I was born, and I've always lived here. And they've both lived here as long as I've been alive. So yeah, half Spanish, but from London originally. And I suppose because of my mum being Spanish, she was always listening to quite a lot of Latin American music at home, Cuban music, and mainly Cuban music actually. So I was always hearing that stuff. And my best friend when I was at school, who is still well, yeah, my oldest friend now is a sax player called Leo Richardson, who's from London, but his dad was a bass player called Jim Richardson, who was English, but actually spent some time in the States, played with Chet Baker for a while, and like did some relatively high profile stuff in the jazz world for an English bass player. And he's still around, Jim. He's amazing. He's a great guy. But so through Leo, through being friends with Leo and Leo's dad being, a bona fide jazzer, I kind of started hearing jazz and funk and Tower of Power, Earth, Wind and Fire, stuff like that. And I had a little crew of friends at school. There were two other friends who also had musician dads. I just got very lucky. My friend Lester, whose dad is a session drummer here in the UK called Ralph Salmins, who's toured with Van Morrison and like lots of stuff like that. And my friend Fabio, whose dad is a percussionist from Brazil called Bosco de Oliveira, who I can't remember what he did, but he was also doing like sessions and pop stuff when we were kids, and they were all just kind of in that world. So I suppose for a lot of kids, they don't know anyone who's necessarily like in the music industry. But for me, it was kind of the opposite way around. It was just quite like normal, just like, oh yeah, Ralph's with Robbie Williams. Oh, he's with Van Morrison at the moment. Oh, he's doing that. Oh
Yeah.
yeah, Jim played with Chet Baker. Oh yeah, here's a video on YouTube of Jim playing with Chet Baker. Like, oh yeah, there it is. It's not just some like story. I'll send you the video afterwards.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and so I was really into rock and metal as a teenager first, just because I guess that's classic adolescent music. But quite quickly, by around like 15 or so, these guys, Leo, Fabio, and Lester, had kind of steered me in this kind of funk direction, because that's what we were trying to play. And then from there, it was like going into, when they still existed, CD shops in central London. I heard Kind of Blue in the CD shop, went to the guy behind the counter, what's this? Miles Davis, Kind of Blue. Yeah, cool, I'll buy that. Sounds great. And then I just started buying other jazz CDs. I remember buying Sidewinder, Lee Morgan, Search for the New Land. Um, yeah, and at first, definitely it was the heads that I got that I understood, and the solos, the blowing. I didn't really know what was going on, but I would listen to it for long enough to hear the head again. This is, when I was 15 or whatever, and then gradually over time, I started to appreciate the the kind of amazing thing that is someone just improvising. Just like hearing a person's voice through an instrument. Kind of unfolding in real time. I think maybe when I was a teenager, I maybe heard it, maybe just how a lot of people hear music, which is I was just waiting for the thing that I liked to happen. And then, gradually, I guess I developed this other perspective where I wasn't waiting for one specific thing, one specific hook that I knew was about to come. And I was just able to enjoy the person's voice. Yeah.
So, what was the first live show you saw that blew you away that maybe made you think, I want to do this one day?
There's an amazing sax player here from the UK. I don't know if you know of him, called Soweto Kinch. Um, he's a
Wow.
alto sax player and a rapper. Soweto, like the place, and then Kinch, like Kinch.
Yeah.
And he's an amazing rapper and an amazing sax player, like, very deep into both things. And it's also interesting because hip hop and rapping is something where like technical virtuosity everyone can understand if someone's incredibly good at rapping. But with jazz improvisation, it feels like sometimes you can be very good, but a lot of people just would have no idea that you're very good because to them it might sound quite similar to someone who isn't very good. Maybe. I think I'm generalizing a bit, but anyway, Soweto Kinch is very good at both things, and he played a show in North London where I grew up, where we all grew up, and we went to see that when we were 15 or so. That was the first time I experienced the thing of people clapping at the end of the solo.
Yeah.
I didn't, had no idea what that was, didn't know what was going on. But then gradually over the course of the gig, it was like, okay, they're clapping in the middle of the song. Why are they doing that? There must be something special about what was just happening. Like, it wasn't even super clear to me, what was improvised and what wasn't at that point.
Yeah.
But, the overall vibe I loved. And also, I think I loved, I've never thought about this before, the fact that compared to like rock bands who were like trying to look cool
Yeah.
and stern, this band were just smiling at each other, like they were just having a nice
Yeah.
time.
Right. Right.
um, and I remember being like, "Oh, that's so you can be on a stage and you don't have to like pretend like you're in a bad mood or something. Like
Right.
you can just be yourself. You can just be enjoying it." And um, yeah, I think I picked up on that as well. The guitarist in that band was an amazing guitarist called Femi Tomowo. I think the drummer was Troy Miller, I think. And I can't remember who was on bass, which is awful because I love the bass, but that's a classic story, isn't it?
Yeah, that's great. It is interesting. I've never thought about that before, how much posturing goes into other genres like
Mm,
rock and how
mm,
jazz
mm.
musicians just let it go. They're just free,
Well, yeah,
you know?
I can't remember where I heard it, but I heard this amazing little nugget from someone somewhere, and I think they were talking about people like Sonny Rollins, Jim Hall, who like got to be very old and was still gigging. In fact, I saw Jim Hall here in London only a little while before he died, and it was so good to see just because of this thing that I had heard someone say, which was like jazz and maybe blues, and maybe again like maybe folk, maybe like jazz, blues, and folk, those kind of genres or worlds. The older you get, like the cooler you are. Just the fact, BB King,
Yep.
Jelly Madi Tunkara, this amazing Malian guitarist who I love, Frizzell, Jim Hall,
Yeah,
as they get older, they just get cooler just because they're still doing it.
totally.
Whereas, I don't know, rock, like old rockers are not cool. I mean, I know I shouldn't
I
say it,
get
I
it. No,
shouldn't say it,
I get
but
what you're saying. I totally get it. You're right.
um,
You're right. That's interesting. I never thought about
yeah,
that. That's
no,
revelatory because that's true. I mean,
yeah,
except if you're Mick Jagger and everybody's impressed that you're still running
it's
around.
true. Jagger
Right.
is still cool. McCartney is still cool,
Right. Right. Right.
but
But
maybe
if
not like
quiet,
Motley Crue or
right. So yeah, you see Vince Neil up there, you're like, oh man, you hit it hard for a long time. Or, yeah, or like Quiet Riot gets back together, or Foreigner, or Loverboy, and you're like, wow, you guys really, things happen in your life. But that's
Yeah.
kind of the way that world worked. I watched a documentary recently about on Sunset Boulevard, how like Motley Crue began this whole thing of like hard rock, heavy metal hair bands. And so many of those people went through perilous situations of almost dying. And if they survived, you could see the weather on them.
Yeah.
So I get it. Yeah. Anyway. Yeah.
Yeah. That's interesting, isn't it? Because a lot of jazzers live pretty hard as well. Although maybe not Jim Hall or
Yeah.
Frizzell, but maybe I mean I don't know to be honest. But
Yeah.
yeah. But I suppose maybe it's something about the authenticity and the posturing, right? That like maybe
Totally.
hair metal and some of those genres, part of the genre is intentionally a performance.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Whereas maybe not all the time, but maybe a lot of the time with jazz, maybe comparatively, there's relatively little performance other than just this is me,
Yep.
this is what I do.
Yep.
I've practiced a lot because I want to be good and I want to make beautiful music, you
Yep.
know.
I totally get it. I totally get it. So speaking of making beautiful music and performing live and just being a musician, what do you like the best about being a professional musician? What gets you up every day?
Oh, that's good. It's probably learning new stuff and then getting to try and execute that new stuff, I think.
Yeah.
Um I think that it's all like whenever I've got some tunes that if I need to learn a new set of repertoire for a gig, I'm always simultaneously resentful and excited. Because I'm like, oh, I've got to learn like 12 tunes. And because I want to do things to a high standard, I'm like, oh, I should probably memorize them. I probably shouldn't use charts on the gig. Okay, so I've got to memorize 12 tunes from scratch. Okay, so I'm like a little bit irritated, but at the same time, I'm really excited because I'm like, but once I've learned these 12 tunes, that's going to be 12 tunes that I know.
Yeah.
And I'm going to get better just from learning them.
Yeah.
And I'm going to be able to like try out that thing that thing that I tried to transcribe the other day. Maybe I'm going to be able to use that in some of these tunes or whatever. So I think that's a big part of it, just the constant like learning, trying stuff out and getting better, I suppose. Maybe like how some people, just like the satisfaction of going to the gym and building muscle or whatever. I do get a certain amount of satisfaction just from like getting better and like seeing my own progress. But I suppose on the flip side, that is not necessarily going to lead to the best music or the best art. But I think I also like getting better at writing, improvising. Like getting better for me in improvising doesn't necessarily mean being able to do more or play faster or more complicated stuff, but just being able to you know, like easily play a solo that's melodic and a good artistic statement like that, for like finding that easier and more natural, which it does, over the years, is a really satisfying thing. Like being closer to expressing myself artistically each gig, even if it's just like 1% closer each time. Like when I've heard back a recording of myself from a studio session or from a gig, and I know that it was a live take, and I know that that solo is like the first one I did, and if I hear it back and I'm like, yeah, that's what I wanted to play, that's an incredibly satisfying thing. And obviously that's something that, since I started playing the guitar when I was 9, that's a thing that I'm kind of always trying to get to. And it's always slightly out of reach because just because I do it once, I might do another recording a few months later and just play a load of stuff that I think is unusable. And then I'm like, okay, so. But I think it's a bit, there's this thing in game design, like computer game design, called the combat loop, which I think is this concept of like, you kill that enemy, that gives you some rewards or some loot, that makes you stronger. Then you want to go find some new enemies to try out your new thing.
Yeah.
You kill them, that gives you some rewards.
Yeah.
So I think it's something, to do with our neurology, and game designers kind of exploit that reward circuit in our brain. But I think I have the same thing with, yeah, with music and improvising. And then also I'm completely leaving out like connection, playing with people. Basically, there is just something about playing in real time with another person and hearing this thing come to life and bloom. I was actually listening maybe last night to your episode with the Motor City Octet.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
and
David.
he
Yeah.
said something. Yeah, he said about which I really related to, just the joy of like, you got a chart, everyone's sitting there, you put the chart in front of the eight musicians, they just start playing, and then this thing just exists that
Uh-huh.
didn't exist a moment ago.
Organism. Yeah.
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 And that happening like with other people is just, it's still, yeah, something that's unlike any other experience, because when it's happened, even from the first bar, like on a couple of the tunes on this lo-fi album, like the second tune, Dedication to David T, that take that's on the album is the first take.
Yeah.
And I think it was one of those moments where like, as soon as we played beat one at the beginning of that track, we were all just kind of like, oh, it's happening. Like we already know.
Yeah.
We already know just from beat one.
Yeah.
It's happening. And we finished it, and then the engineer, Ben, who's amazing, said on the talkback, all right, nice one. What do you want to do next? That's done. And
Wow.
we all, yeah, but we were all kind of like, despite what I just said, we were all like, oh, we should probably do another one, shouldn't we? And Ben, the engineer, was like, no. And we were just like, no, but we should though.
Yeah.
We did another one. We listened back to them afterwards, and we were like, oh yeah, it's the first one. Yeah.
That's awesome. So let me ask you this: Perfect Strangers, where's the best place for people to pick up a copy that's going to benefit you the most?
Bandcamp.
Okay, that's right. I don't want to presume. Sometimes.
No.
Yeah.
Thanks. That's all right. Bandcamp's
And then
the best.
live shows, anything coming up? The warm months or
Yeah.
anything? Yeah.
Yeah. At the moment, we've only got one confirmed in the diary, which is Wednesday, 30th of April in London at the Vortex, which is a jazz institution in London. But I'm, behind the scenes, I'm doing a bit of work, and hopefully there'll be more populating the diary soon. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I'll shuttle everybody your way. Greg, thank you for reaching out. Thank you for the music. This was very insightful. This is wonderful.
Oh, thanks, Joe. Really, real pleasure to chat to you. Yeah.
Yeah,
Appreciate the
great talking
time.
to you. Yeah, you bet. And before